Welcome back to Hardball. A lot of Democrats think they won control of Congress last year by campaigning for an end to the Iraq War. Last night, however, House Democrats decided to move forward with a war funding bill that does not include a timeline for withdrawing U.S. troops. U.S. Congressman Rahm Emanuel of Illinois is the chairman of the House Democratic Caucus. Let him explain right now. So, Congressman, explain how this is the beginning of the end of this war in Iraq.
Well, first of all, the president said no to timelines, and we said no to a blank check. What he also said was, about a week ago, he said he would not accept the benchmarks that are in the Senator Warner proposal and the two reports. He said he opposed it just a week ago. Now, attached to the funding will actually be policy. Remember two things. He's had 6 funding bills equaling over $500 billion with a total blank check over the last 4 years of this war. This is the first funding that's had policy attached to it that requires him 18 separate benchmarks that have to be met and timelines, as well as 2 separate reports, one on July 15th and one in September, on the progress of the war, as well as the progress in making a political solution. That is the first time there's been any policy attached to it. It doesn't have the timelines, something we wanted, but it has benchmarks, something he didn't want.
Do they have teeth? Do those benchmarks have teeth?
No, and I think it has some teeth and some elements. And I think what happens here, Chris, and why I believe this is the beginning end, is it's the end of a blank check, and it's the beginning of bringing accountability to the progress and the prosecution of this war. That's number one. Number two, immediately in July rather, we're going to take up the defense appropriations bill, the full funding for the defense effort. And in there, we're going to put other policy issues. And Congressman Jack Murtha has outlined those to the caucus of what we're going to accomplish. And that will again take up and ratchet up and bring some accountability and oversight to this effort in Iraq. And the second thing is, remember, just a week ago, about 14 Republicans went to the White House and said, we're done with this as prosecuted, this war. And in September, if General Petraeus cannot say we're making significant progress, we're done, Mr. President, giving you a blank check and walking blindly behind you. Now, that is, as you remember in history, when a president's own party begins to crack under the pressure, you then build a bipartisan consensus to bring this war to a conclusion as prosecuted by this president. And that's why I believe this is the beginning of the end. And most importantly, when there's already, you can see in the papers, Chris, is they're now talking about another plan beyond the surge because the surge hasn't brought the type of peace and
Have you
space.
ever heard of a general saying he can't meet a mission? I mean, won't Petraeus have to, because of his oath of office, come back and say, Mr. President, we can do this job? And the minute he says that, you guys lose the argument.
No. First of all, I'm not going to predict, nor are you going to predict what he said.
I will predict that no military man in my lifetime has ever said we can't win. That's not the job of a U.S. military officer. It's to say we can win.
No, I think my guess is you're going to get, over here we're making some progress, over there you're not, and you're going to see what you're going to see on the ground. But what you do now know is that the president's own party and members of the congressional wing of his own party have said, no more like this. Senator Warner, although it's a compromise, not one that we fully endorse in the sense of everything we wanted, but does accomplish this main objective, accountability, does start to begin the process of changing the direction. It's not everything. Nobody will ever say it's everything, but it's the first step, and that is why I say it's the beginning of the end of the war as prosecuted by this president.
Can you clarify this? There's been so much discussion, as you just did, about Petraeus having his report in September, and we're all waiting for it, of course, and we trust him. He's very respected. But here's the question. The president has never spelled out that if this is a negative report, if he says we've had a really hard time clearing these areas, that he'll change his policy. Has Bush ever told you, the president, that he will change his policy if we're not winning?
Chris, there's two times. I always argue there was always 2 timelines in this war as it relates. One was the President of the United States is determined on January 20th of 2009 to leave a big box in the Oval Office, on the desk in the Oval Office, stamped Iraq, for the person replacing him, because he doesn't have the political capacity, nor does he want to try to resolve what happens. The Republicans in Congress said, you got to September '07. If there is no change in either the context of this war or change in the direction and the policy pursuing, we're not going to vote blindly as you has asked. And that's the debate, is between the Republican congressional wing on their timeline and what the president's determined to see. And what we're forcing is in constantly bringing pressure endlessly to bring a different direction, which is why the Republicans finally said, we can't keep having votes where we're blindly supporting a policy that's not bearing fruit. And that's how you have a change in policy. You just don't do it Democrats confronting the president, but ratcheting up the power where Republicans finally go to the White House, as they did a week ago, and say, Mr. President, no more.
Are you hearing anything indirectly through friends in the House that is the case, that they are ready to jump ship?
Oh, there's no... I'm not going to expose individuals.
I'm not saying the names, but are you hearing from Republican colleagues that they have had it?
Oh, absolutely. And it crosses ideological, geographic spaces where they basically see the policy as pursued by the president. Even the surge hasn't accomplished what they said. You know, any paper you open up, they're talking about another plan, another idea, because this is the third surge with the same results. The president's policy of more troops, more time, more money, and more of the same has worn thin with Congress, Senate, and the American people and the international community. He is isolated because the way he has pursued this war has isolated. I always remind people this. On September 11th, 2001, the entire world, after those events, stood with us. 6 years later, we have very few friends in the international community who see what we're doing around the Mideast and around the world as in their best interest.
Yeah.
And that is an amazing 6 years, and now even the president's own party that has been blindly loyal for him in this effort has told him to his face, members of his own congressional wing of his party said, what you're doing isn't working and you need a new policy.
Well, I think you're preaching to the choir.